You're the Associate Professor and Program Director of Graduate Architecture, Department of Graduate Built Environment Studies in the School of Architecture and Planning at Morgan State University. So like how, I mean, in STS and Science Technology Studies, like that's one of the biggest things of the materiality of things and how values
Yeah.
are hard coded inside of technologies and certain affordances, deaffordances. So I guess moving past thinking in terms of access, et cetera, what do you, how do you get people to kind of think a little bit more in terms of, I don't know, sociocultural, sociopolitical, these kind of bigger kind of themes in design in your teaching, and then maybe just talk us through some of the classes that you teach, or how do you kind of go about doing this? Because again, being a head of a department is one thing, but then also being a head of a department, as you said, as a HBSC, then I think that you probably have some interesting kind of tidbits, not just to say about your profession, but then also, again, the space that you're located within, which is quite interesting in Baltimore.
Well, I've learned so much from your colleagues in anthropology and science and technology
Yeah.
studies, and I'm a huge fan of STS for so many reasons. I
Yeah.
appreciate just the generosity of the practice of the
Mm-hmm.
that's inherent in the approach that you all use, that you all bring to the things that you study, and also of course the kinds of questions that you all ask that focus on, okay, what's the stuff, who's in the room, what are they bringing, what kind of backgrounds do they have.
Yep.
My friend and colleague Lisa Masseri, who's an anthropologist in STS, she likes to say who makes, and I'll paraphrase, and forgive me Lisa for getting it wrong, but who makes the spaces in which spaces are made, and kind of
Ooh,
building on
love it.
questions that Donna Haraway and others
Yeah, of
ask.
course. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to understand where you're from, right? And
Mm-hmm.
understand and then where you're at. And so being at a place like Morgan, in a place like Baltimore, is a really great place. It's a really great set of rooms in which to make the future. And I like
Sure.
to think that's that kind of practice and centering those kinds of awarenesses, is central to what we do. We had, and for example, in the 2020 kind of iteration of the Black Lives Matter moment,
Uh-huh.
when these conversations came to the forefront, we had a lot of people from other universities asking, like, okay, how do we decolonize our curriculum? How do we think about, we've been thinking about form, but how do we integrate conversations about justice, spatial justice, into conversations about space and form? And Morgan is a place where we've been having those conversations for a long, long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about explicitly, and for example, my urban design class, questions about the historical reasons for why Baltimore is the way it is, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
still read patterns of redlining and systemic disinvestment in current demographics
Yeah.
today, right? If you superimpose the red line map on the map of, say, life expectancy at birth by zip code, it's the same map, right? So these questions are spatial questions. Integration and segregation are spatial practices, and understanding that a place like an HBCU, to talk about spatial justice and race,
Mm-hmm.
brings a lot of inherent histories. Most
Oh,
HBCUs were integrated before Brown versus Board of Education. HBCUs invited white students in before white institutions invited Black students,
wow.
which I think is a fascinating aspect of institutional history.
Yeah.
I'm aware every day, as a white academic teaching at an HBCU, that this is a place that's not designed to center people who look like me, and yet I am a valued guest in the space. And I think that's an important kind of experience that a lot of people could benefit from. In my environmental controls class, we talk about things like how and why is the air designed the way it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? We take for granted in architecture that, okay, we design, what the wall's made of, we design the dimensions and sizes and shapes of things. But we also design things like the air, like the surface of the ground, for example, and does that include or exclude certain people by
Mm-hmm.
design? There's a there are so many ways into the question of who the space is for, that I think architecture as a discipline sometimes forgets and sometimes remembers. And it's great that we're in a moment where my discipline is interested in actively remembering. But places like HBCUs are important for so many reasons. Not the least, there are places where if you want to know, where that conversation has been going on, come here,
Yeah,
and
right.
talk with us and ask questions and listen, because it might be new to you, or it might be being remembered, by certain aspects of the discipline or by institutions. But some people never forgot, and
Right.
some places you can't forget.
So I guess my follow-up question for some of that would be not to, I mean, you're definitely doing some epistemic activism in kind of the spaces and stuff, but I guess my question for you would be a little bit more personal, and like how do you see, or what do you get out of kind of teaching the future? Because if we're designing for the future, but then you're also molding minds in the future, like I don't know if you have any specific things of like, have you always, do you just love teaching, or is it just kind of a thing to have, and then you kind of found a great opportunity in Morgan State? Because I think for a lot of people, at least academics, the professorship is really, I wouldn't say a calling, but there are people who like enjoy it for just the teaching aspect of the molding of the minds, et cetera. And I don't know if you kind of fall along that camp, because the next question would be some of your other work, the working group on adaptive systems and things like that. So I guess we'll wait for a second, but what are kind of your thoughts on just teaching and molding specific, society minds, not just places and et cetera?
Well, for me, it goes back to the question of concreteness. It's I
Okay.
like I like design education specifically because there are always things in the space to point to, right? I'm here just with blank
Plenty of
white background
examples.
because I haven't cleaned up the other half of my office, but we're in very specific spaces with tons of examples to
Yeah.
discuss. And what I think, what is the core of my teaching practice, is being able to remind students and to sort of unlock within them the sense that somebody made everything in your field of view and in the space that you're occupying. It's not inevitable like the weather. It didn't happen due to, strange cosmic forces beyond our control and understanding, right? There are reasons why certain decisions were made, and certain decisions could have gone otherwise.
Yeah.
And that practice, happened in a room with specific people, right? Again, specificity and concreteness come into play, and you will be able to be in that room. You should be in that room, right? that
Right.
that is the core of my practice, is to look around and say everything that exists was made. It was made by means of specific decisions and relationships and intentions and limitations. You can participate in that process, and you
Mm-hmm.
should. That process needs you to participate in it, because if you don't, someone else will.
Yep.
So
Good
that's
point.
been the core of my. I don't swing hammers or frame buildings, or not the least, I don't jackhammer sidewalks, and I'm very grateful for the people who do that. But the methodology of teaching is to remember that those people who do, matter, and that
Mm-hmm.
you can be one of them. And I think that's really, really important, and that's something that I center in design studio and in the seminars that I teach. I think I I teach in seminars. I teach beginning design studio, so design studio for graduate students who are coming in with like no background in design.
Mm-hmm.
But I also teach at two scales. I teach urban design, at the bigger sort of scale, and environmental controls, which is like building
Right.
systems and lighting, sound. So it's like the scale of the room and the scale of the city.
Oh, very cool.
And
Yeah.
it's great to be able to work with the same students at all those multiple scales, and to talk about how they all interrelate and connect, and how they are all the way they are because of specific human decisions and human relationships,
Yep.
and that you need to be a part of that system. You need to be a part of those relationships and conversations and decision making processes.